Hello there. Thank you for this opportunity to talk with you about a pretty delicate subject. Most of what we learn about agentic AI in terms of implementations, we learn from polls, pronouncements from CEOs claiming AI has replaced and justified layoffs. There's some research studies in this field. And it's so very hard to get an actual, factual, clear sense of what's really going on. So my mission today, oops, sorry about that. My mission today is to give you a very grounded view on not just what's going on, but some of the implications of that change in the near future. Here we go. So what this talk will cover: the current state. I'm going to try to summarize all that the research studies are finding now, the implications of that, what the research suggests, the forecast, and then in conclusion, what this means for you. And I have to open up my presentation with a disclaimer. What the slides you're about to see have just really, really bad production values. There are no graphics, there's no soaring music, no animations, really just butt ugly. And some of them even have footnotes. So again, apologize for that. I'm used to talking to board of directors and academic conferences, not a fancy schmancy place like this. So here we go. I want you to focus on the highlighted line here. An important thing to realize about the grandest conversations surrounding AI is that most of the time, everyone is making things up. If you were to summarize all the research studies, all what we learned to date about it, I would sort of classify them in three buckets. One is the use case story. Those started out right after ChatGPT was launched in November of 2022. And it's a real hodgepodge of corporate announcements. We laid off half of our lawyers because we use ChatGPT to do contract reviews. Task exposure models, and those are the ones that get most of the headlines. You've seen them saying, we're going to be able to replace all the radiologists in the next 3 years, or we're going to do away with the auditors. And those are based on sort of a hypothetical analysis of what models can do versus what people do now. And many of them are based on job descriptions. And I'm sure most of you know, what you spend most of your time on and your job description are not the same. The most reliable ones are randomly controlled experiments, but even those are based on lab simulated environments. So it's basically impossible to generalize. Then there's the scale story. And that's the one that's been going on for the past couple of years. Those are case studies and market research polls. And there you see Russell Reynolds saying that, over 80% of the firms have implemented AI. Wharton says it's 74, IBM says it's 16, MIT says it's 5, and McKinsey says it's 1. So what's the status of scale? We don't know. And then there's this transformation story, and that's what I'm going to be talking most about today, where you actually start to change the roles and change the organizational structure. And then it's just really too early to say, although I will share some early research in that field. So the best use case story comes out of Microsoft and Carnegie Mellon. This was a use case story analysis based on over 300 knowledge workers. The upside, there was increased productivity. It was reshaping workflows. Interestingly, developing prompting skills rivals subject matter expertise. And if that isn't a powerful statement about the democratization of expertise, I don't know what is. And it noted a 7% increase in higher order analysis studies. And those of you who have used AI and you set up agents know that it really does force you to be very explicit, very specific on what you need to do, what are the boundary conditions are, what context it's in, what information it needs. There's downside. There's a almost 20% decrease in knowledge recall and comprehension. So there is such a thing as cognitive offloading, and your brain gets a little lazy. And even more disturbingly, there's a 20% increase in the overestimation of accuracy if it comes out of an AI tool. So the takeaway, changing the way the knowledge works, but has both positive and negative effects. Another use case story is the power of suitability. I think most of you are probably already familiar with this. This is the HBC, Harvard, MIT, the Sloan School. And they basically divvied up about 800 strategy consultants from the Boston Consulting Group, gave them a task that kind of lends itself to ChatGPT-4, other half that required the tool to sort of read in between the lines on personal interviews and transcripts, which it's not very good at the time. And so the takeaway is it's not whether you use, it's how you use it and what you use it for. Although that jagged frontier, being good at some things and not being good at others, is smoothing out as these models and apps develop. And of course, I'm sure you've heard this all from other speakers over the past couple of days. Organizational readiness as AI matures. It's really the people, the workforce skills, the governance and the change management that becomes the bottleneck, not just the technical capability. So it magnifies the potential productivity of individual contributors, but traditional organizational structures, particularly decision-making processes, are not equally able to scale. I'm sure other speakers have talked about this at length. I'm just going to summarize. If one to sort of generalize all the sort of horror stories from companies scaling AI, I would sort of put them in two buckets. One, just the lack of ROI. Demos are designed to impress and look good, but rollouts require a lot of work for firm level results. The underlying cause, I think the pilots are not representative of the population. They're using with clean data. They have simple, limited scope. There's a well-defined dev environment. And they have informed, motivated employees working on this. They want to do this. And I would cite a study at the bottom, which you can't possibly read from this distance, but it says that almost 30% of employees confess to undermining or sabotaging efforts to use AI because they're seeing that they're being trained to replace themselves with AI, which is in some cases completely valid. So you need a broad, AI is not plug and play. I'm sure most of you already know that. You need a broader representation, but most importantly, you need to leverage tools that work in your workflows with your data. Instead of chasing the latest tool that goes out there, look what's in your infrastructure, what's supported to you or has access to your data, your ERP, your CRM that's already there. There's another category, and that's one where performance actually declines. And I've labeled that magical thinking. Are you often in a meeting that's not really a meeting? It's two or three people having a conversation and just you're in the audience? Have you ever wished an email from corporate communications department came with an English translation? Are you on one-day seminars that could have easily been done with an email? So AI does not fix poor management practices. In fact, it can be used to accelerate them and make the problem worse. I'm sure you get all these, just because the tool can summarize meeting minutes, they start distributing all the meeting minutes to everyone. And, so you're decreasing the productivity and inefficiency of your organization. What else do we have here? Sloppy execution. So they designed a chatbot to deal with customer complaints very quickly. And as a result of being so terse, they alienate customers. So you really haven't done well what's called intent engineering. What's the ultimate goal? You want the customer to be satisfied, not exactly a quick call. And what else do we have here? Automating parts of the workflow. I already talked about that. One part is sort of starts to overwhelm the other part. Output without comprehension. We've talked about vibe coding here, and planning cycles just don't keep up. So the bottom line is that the real value comes from the end-to-end process and looking at that. So I recently did a study because I was just wondering, there hasn't been major improvements in productivity. There hasn't been major implications in job displacement. So is there any evidence of structural change? And the answer is yes. I decided to look at second order effects, and I propositioned that over the last couple of years, with the rollout of generative AI, there'd be flatter organizational structures, there'll be broader job roles, and there'd be greater pay differential as AI disproportionately magnifies the productivity of sort of high agency, high performers relative to other workers. And sure enough, I thought, maybe one or two tests would come out statistically significant. Every single test I ran came out statistically significant. That means the 0.001 means there's a 99.9% probability it is causal rather than due to random effects. You see there, if you can have really good eyeglasses or eyesight, strong negative correlation. So basically, AI is associated with smaller management layers, leaner structures, and middle management declines by 15%. Increased cross-functional job structuring. You can see those that embraced AI, almost a 50% increase in department structure, another 50% in cross-functional workloads, another 43% in reorganizing relationships, and then increased wage differential with an over 400% premium for AI software engineers relative to other workers. And you see this in Silicon Valley where you have billion-dollar tech hires or million-dollar packages for software engineers. So you might ask, okay, fine. So what is the current state? Hype continues to outpace reality, but the potential for organizationally is consequential. As the host said, you start building organizational structures around agents rather than just people. And so it's pretty clear that the revolution is going to bring around these changes. It's really, so far the changes have been sort of based on current structures rather than any sort of dramatic new structure. If anyone needs persuading on how powerful processes can be re-engineered, I would invite you to look at the product or solution development process in most organizations. The old way, high cost, high friction, high latency, business users weren't always really good at articulating what the requirements were. They didn't understand, what was native to a certain software solution or requiring configuration or customization, so they weren't prepared to really make those trade-offs. Any of that sound familiar to anyone? And then the tech people are just trying to keep up and trying to figure out what the requirements really are, rather than the needs to have versus the might have. And so you have all these static document-based, I list them there. There are too many to list, but all this documentation used for kind of sharing context and understanding of what's going on, tailored to different audiences. And so through months, maybe years of effort, you finally come up with a prototype. Compare that to what you can do now with Stitch or Claude Design. You can build the artifact and have people use it and test it and put inputs to it. And so you have interactive, executable, auditable, interoperable artifacts that are iteratively streamlined to support the decision-making process. So you have all this communication overhead just disappears. So what are the implications for that? And that's probably the most interesting part of this talk. Not so much what's happened, but what might happen or will happen soon. I would say in terms of leadership, models make everything transparent. Everything is reduced to an input, a process, and an output, which is verifiable and testable. And that forces accountability. It forces what processes create value and what doesn't. There's a challenge to manage morale and burnout, because as most people who is frequent users of AI will tell you, it doesn't reduce the work, it intensifies it, it magnifies it. And then honest, straight talk about the impact and scope of change. None of this is quick, simple, or easy, and adoption is much higher when employees perceive a clear AI strategy. Organizational design is fascinating to me. What you have to realize is all the job descriptions that you all have, they're obsolete. They're all based on what one person could reasonably do. That person now has 20 agents working for them. That changes the whole dynamic. When I was on the business side, I was always pressured to make the monthly numbers, to make the quarterly numbers. Innovation, R&D, those were luxuries that, maybe I could handle that if I had in my spare time, which I never did. And then when I was on the IT side, it was really the care and feeding of the infrastructure, the pushing through the patches of known security. You don't have the time or the resources to innovate. And that just really has to change in the AI-enabled organization. And so it sort of suggests broader context, multidisciplinary roles, and smaller teams, so to reduce that communication context overhead. What does that mean for talent management? You need to provide incentives for people to adopt AI, not just threaten them with being replaced. Recruitment, you have to focus on the high agency employees who can do now the work of maybe 20 not so high agency employees. Data governance is a mixed bag. So the bad news is that businesses created their own proliferation of EUC, end user computing databases, because they couldn't trust the IT department to keep up with them. IT department didn't have the resources and the power, because they're a cost center, to justify doing data governance well. And so maybe with this new type of structure, they'll have the power to really enforce discoverable, clean, up-to-date data throughout the organization. Product system development, I already talked about that. Process engineering is embedding intelligence is all about decomposing workflows and processes into trigger events, inputs, execution, outputs, boundary conditions, and edge cases. And here, the concept of KISS is so important when you're delegating to agents. You don't want different agents to have shared context. You keep it simple, you keep them in their silos. Simplicity and specificity scales, complexity and ambiguity kills. And then systems engineering is about the trust architecture. And that requires a much more powerful governance model than most organizations have now. And of course, the harness that enables the agents or the infrastructure that you have to embed that intelligence rather than all residing in a model somewhere. And so, I don't know, many of you are in the risk and control function, maybe not, but it really requires a completely different rethink in the organizational structure, in the power dynamic and the hierarchy, because EUC, end user computing, that was considered a sin. The AI auditors would rap you on the knuckles if you created something that you desperately need for your business. But they have a point that it doesn't have the security protocols, the production controls that the AI IT system does. They're going to have to create much stronger standards, architectural standards that will empower and enable the lines of business to create new technology and process engineering. Now, many of you, I imagine, are wondering what those line of business 1, 2, 3 are. This is my best guess of what I think that looks like. It's a much flatter and simplified structure with multidisciplinary roles. I see sort of a lead grow function. That's a leadership team with DevOps, supply chain, financial management in it. You might say, well, gosh, how does a leader take on all those things? Again, it's a leader with a dozen agents working for him. That skill set is conceptualized mission and strategic goals and agent deployment, domain expertise, sense making, prioritization, validation, leadership. And those outputs are profitable growth, strategic alignment, organizational design, intelligent recruitment. I see another layer, sort of process engineering, client market development, product solution development, an AI lead or a forward deployed engineer, business SMEs, and then R&D and ecosystem. You mean monitoring the system, monitoring what's going out there, what are your competitors doing? That's becoming an important business skill in a business unit setting. Decompose, embed intelligence, task, workflows, processes, identify boundary conditions, create safeguards. I think you heard the story about the rental company that designed an agent that wound up wiping out the entire customer base because they didn't put around proper safeguards around it. And then there's, of course, the thing that's probably most familiar to you is the execution part of the business, the individual contributors, directly responsible individuals, and the player coaches. And they're about orchestrating agents, prompt engineering, knowing what to ask, context engineering, knowing what data are relevant to that task, and of course, intent engineering, which we've talked about before. And that's revenue per employee. And that's all made possible by that very powerful centralized architectural but decentralized innovation construct where you have strategic sourcing, data governance, systems engineering, sec DevOps, enterprise risk management, and model governance. This is my last slide. What does this all mean for you? Well, I can see a bunch of different things, but I would leave you with the most powerful argument on this slide is that given AI's capabilities to analyze, acquire, and integrate intelligence, it's not just the intelligence, the way to integrate it and deploy it. Businesses have the ability to innovate and execute as never before. You look what Aru is doing in terms of predicting consumer behavior. So instead of focus groups and whatnot and surveys, you can have thousands and thousands of agents with very detailed psychological profiles to model, to simulate what millions of customers are doing. Discern, viewer, and vent. This is Tubi's doing. Tubi is a streaming service. And I don't know if you remember in the old days, when collaborative filtering came about, the same people who bought this product bought that product, and we went, ooh, that was really cool. This is used ChatGPT to discern not just the explicit intent, but the implicit intent of viewers. So it's going to read your mind. It's going to know what you like, even though you're not aware of what you like. And if you don't think that's a powerful tool, I don't know, it is. And then, of course, I'm sure you've heard all about, the agentic shopping, agentic trade, where agents have contracts they have currency, they have permissions, and so they'll do business with other agents and basically leave the humans all about setting the boundary conditions, terms and conditions, pricing. I mean, the ability to price dynamically in real time relative to consumer demand or changes in cost on the supplier side and logistics. Yeah, it's frightening, but it's also amazing. And the people who get that right will clearly have a competitive advantage. And the irony of all this, I would argue, is that because machines are becoming more intelligent, that makes human expertise and judgment all that more valuable, because the bottleneck now shifts from execution to deciding what to do, what execution to do. The challenge for all of us is sort of moving from talk to action. You've heard a lot of talk, I think, in your own organizations, I'm sure. To me, it's three things: picking the right strategy, the right structure, and the right people. What do I mean by the right strategy? I've seen organizations build their own retrieval augmented generation models. And at one time, when context windows were really small, that made sense. And so they said, okay, well, we're going to build upon that. We're going to improve upon it. And they had to get the chunking strategy. I don't know if many of you have worked on RAG models, but to get that semantic meaning in those vector databases right, understanding the relationships, understanding the hierarchical relationship between different concepts is a pretty tricky thing. Only for context windows now to expand where most RAG systems are useless. You didn't have to do that. Same thing with agent orchestration networks. Some companies just built their own agent orchestration networks only for have OpenClaw on the open side, or things like Windows 11, where agent orchestration is native to the operating system. My advice is, don't build on what they do. Don't try to improve their product. The tech bros of Silicon Valley, yes, they might wind up destroying all humanity, but you can trust them. They want more of your money. They do. So they're going to make their models more powerful. They're going to make them more sticky. They're going to make them more easily integratable in your environment. And they're going to make them more user-friendly. So don't try to compete with them. Do leverage what they've done and see how it applies to your core competency, to your business model, with your data, your processes, your people. The right structure. I talked about that before. Redefining EUC from a sin to a competitive advantage. That's going to require a lot of people to both give up power and accept accountability. And those two things, as most of you know or have learned the hard way, is not easy. And then the right mix of people. We like to think of our organizations as meritocracies, but many of them are still social constructs. Research has found that, hiring decisions are primarily a function of personality. We hire in our own image. Promotions are not always based on meritocracy. Performance evaluations are largely useless. I would argue that probably the most unprepared group in an organizational structure is probably HR. They're not in the talent management business. They're basically in the compliance business. And organizations that really want to make use of this technology are going to need to rethink that whole function. If you have any questions, you want to follow up, you want to discuss this more, please reach out to me. Email's right there, arthur.o'connor@cuny.edu. My time is up. I see all zeros. So thank you.